there we go. I'm all right.
Not
Like
the
to
left
call-
side of the table, that's for sure.
Huh?
Not the left side of the table.
No. We're imbalanced here.
I'm low, Mike.
Call the meeting. I'd like to call the Tuesday, April 16, 2019 meeting of the City and Arbor Park Advisory Commission to order. It's 10 after 4 and we're here in council chambers. Welcome everybody. Colin, would you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Gallardi?
Here.
Commissioner Santa Croce?
Here.
Commissioner Morrison?
Here.
Commissioner Borgsdorf? Commissioner Ramaswamy? Commissioner London?
Here.
Commissioner Apple? Commissioner Kraut?
Here.
Commissioner Skyless? And we have Councilmember Grand and Hayner. You have a
And
quorum.
Ramaswamy is just
Praveen.
arrived.
Okay, super.
Welcome,
Thank you.
Praveen. Item C, approval of the agenda, changes or additions. I've been asked to move G1 and H2 up ahead of F1 in contemplation of some people having to meet earlier. We can make more changes, and if anyone has an objection to those changes, have at it. Hearing none, moving on. Item D, approval of the minutes of the March 19, 2019 meeting. Changes, additions, motions.
Move to accept?
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And I'm going to abstain, I wasn't here. All right, okay, so now here's where it gets tricky, but we're gonna go to, public commentary, limited to 3 minutes per speaker. I know we have at least one member of public who had some parking issues. Step forward, ma'am. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. So I'm Nancy Witter. I live at 235 Brookside Drive, and I'm here to talk about 75 Barton Drive, which is right next to Onder Nature Area, which is at 295 Brookside Drive. It's about 6 houses away from my house. Okay, I'm a volunteer steward there, and I walk my dog through there every day. Practically, he loves the trail. The reason I'm here is just to bring focus to Onder property and 75 Barton property. They're the same ecosystem. They share boundaries. And the house at 75 Barton, in case you didn't know, burned recently. So there's still a burned out house standing on that property. The property is about 1.4 acres. And it's adjoining Onder. And it has, the interesting features of it, well, here in the Natural Area Preservation News from 2007, when the city bought Onder, says that one of Onder's most important ecological features is its location. It's positioned between upland forests of Leslie Park and Black Pond Woods and the riparian complex of Argo, Bandamere, Barton, and Bird Hills. And so it connects those two areas for birds and amphibians, reptiles, seeds, and mammals. And so that's the importance of Onder property. It connects those areas. So this is just my thinking. It would be beneficial for the city to increase the size of Onder by 1.4 acres. And the, you can't see it too well here. Let me see. Here. This is a map of Onder with the border, yellow border. And this is 75 Barton right here. So you can see the border just kind of cuts in to save that property for the house as private, and then this was public. So I think it will also make this, like we say, this is all one ecosystem. And it is kind of an interesting ecosystem because it has a wetland in it. This one, right here. So the wetland kind of goes from here, it's bigger, it goes from here, and then it goes up here, and then it comes back out into Onder. So it starts in Onder, goes into 75 Barton, and then comes back into Onder. And I walked it today. I had never walked on the private property today. It was just a beautiful stream there. There's two streams coming from that wetland. There's a small one, they're right by the entrance of the park, and that one's kind of shallow. It doesn't have a lot of water in it. But this one that comes up from the interior of the nature area and then goes through 75 Barton, that has running water. It's really beautiful. It's got a sandy bed, and it's got clear water, and it's got mossy rocks. And so I don't know how much of this is in private property or in highway easement. That's the only problem, because it is really close to M14. Anyway, but it goes under M14, and then it goes, the stream goes under M14, and then it goes under Barton Drive, and then it ends up in the river right by the M14 bridge. And so it empties right into the Huron River, and it's clean water coming into the Huron River, you know? And done?
We don't really enforce the 3 minutes hard, but we're over
Okay.
it, so if we could
Anyway,
sum up, I would appreciate it.
Yeah, so that's why I think it would be important for the city to preserve this. And, thank you.
Thank you for coming. Is there any other member of the public who'd like to speak? Please step forward.
The timer is stuck at 20 seconds.
Yeah,
Oh, I didn't even look at it.
he was playing with it. We're
Am I
not,
supposed to press the?
no,
you're
don't
not
worry
supposed
about
to.
it.
You're fine.
And we're not gonna, we won't run it tonight, just try to stick to 3 minutes, you're good. We don't have a big crowd, it's nice to be accommodating. Just leave it. Don't touch it, because you'll start beeping on it. Hi, could you tell us who you are, please?
My name is Rachel Foringer. I've lived in Ann Arbor since 1985, 34 years, and 28 of those years I've lived up over on the north side of Ann Arbor. Jeff is my council member. And what my question is to you is, are there any regulations and/or park regulations or statutes or whatever you want to call them that prevent residents of Ann Arbor, tax-paying citizens, of walking on a golf course in the area? That's my question. Does anybody know of any rules, regulations?
So I can
anything?
respond to that. The purpose, for the most part, really for public commentary is not to kind of have a dialogue in terms of questions and answers back and
Okay.
forth. But I can say at the golf course, when it is open for golf and there are actually people playing golf, that's the prime purpose of the property at that time. And we ask that the public not walk. It's actually has to do more to do actually with the safety than anything else, because what we find sometimes is there'll be people who kind of walk across the course who may not play golf. So they're not aware of where they may be in the way of a ball.
Great.
So,
Yep, good.
That's,
a very good point. I
yep.
appreciate that.
so
Is
in
there
the
any-
summertime, in the spring, summer, fall, if there is actually golf going on, then it is not allowed for pedestrians just to walk across the course.
Great, and I really appreciate that, and I would abide by that. Is there any particular reason why I cannot, and/or anybody in the vicinity cannot walk on the golf course? Are there any rules or regulations that say I cannot walk on the golf course when there are no golfers present? Either early in the morning, before
Yep.
they even open, or even late at night when they close?
Again, when the golf course is in season, no. You can't walk across, because at that time, we'll also have the maintenance crew come out actually before it's even light and start to work on it. So I would ask, at the time when the golf course is operation, that one stay off it.
Okay. This, I find terribly offensive. I pay taxes in this town. I have so many hours.
Yeah. So we're not gonna,
No, I just did.
we hear you, we're not, the purpose of this is not to, but is to raise awareness of issues with the city parks, and you've done that wonderfully today.
Thank you, and I think there's a compromise in there. I think putting signs out that keep residents off of property that belongs to the city, and that we pay taxes to fund that facility, to maintain that facility, and everything. And not to mention the fact that they do not, they always run a deficit.
Thanks, ma'am. Staff is aware of it. They're the proper ones to redress this at some
And
point.
if anybody could answer my question about statutes or regulations, I'd really appreciate that.
I don't think we know is the truth.
Yeah,
But someone here does.
I can tell you, there are none.
Is there any other member of the public who'd like to speak? Awesome. Here we go. Then we're going to move on to, and jumping around, G1, which is the resolution to recommend awarding a contract for the Gettys Dam Gate Recoating and Repairs Project to Jairus Construction Company for $828K. Glenn with Zurich?
With Zurich, that's
I
right.
got it right. Welcome, Glenn.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
How can we help you?
So, I'm the engineer at the water plant, and I oversee the capital improvement projects for the 4 dams in the city. And we have an upcoming project driven partially by condition, partially by state inspections. We have this upcoming project at the Gettys Dam, and I put together a short little presentation just to provide some background and a status of where the project's at right now.
Just move the mic closer up, like always straight up.
The table goes up and down.
It's your fault for being tall.
I didn't know that. That's pretty cool.
I didn't know that either, that's great.
I want to ride it next time.
So I thought I'd start with a site plan, an aerial here, give us the lay of the land. And on the far right side of the screen in the yellow circle, we have, of course, the Gettys Dam. The Gettys Dam is important infrastructure for the city as it retains the impoundment that forms Gallup Park and used by the livery. The livery is shown in the yellow circle at the far left. I'm only trying to show the proximity between the two features. The purpose of this next slide is just to give, just to share some of the terms that I'll be using when I discuss the scope of the project, just to familiarize ourselves, a crash course, if you will, on some dam components. The Gettys gates are called radial or tainter gates, and what that means is that they rotate around a pivot point. That pivot point being point C on this photo here. Those are the trunnion pins. And the trunnion pins are basically the connection between the gate and the concrete structure forming the spillway. So these arms and the gate itself, they spin around the trunnion pin. The gate is made up of a series of braces, both small and large, with steel skins that form the remainder of the gate that holds back the water and the impoundment. The other item I wanted to share is the seals. The seal system goes along the bottom of the gate and it goes along the sides, the 2 sides of the gate. And the seal is hard rubber, neoprene. They form the watertight seal between the gate and the concrete. And that's an important component of the project for us, particularly in terms of maintenance, because if these seals leak, that forms a lot of ice buildup in the winter. If not dealt with, the gate can ice close, rendering it inoperable, but it causes a lot of maintenance work to stay on top of that ice. And lastly, hoists, which we're not getting into this project, but just to complete the background, the hoist at the top there, it's a motorized mechanism, and that raises and lowers the gate based upon level in the pond. So the scope of the project, I guess I want to share too that these pictures are the actual pictures from Getty's Getty's Dam. The first thing the contractor is going to do is he's going to bring the stop logs out to the site, and he's going to lower them in by crane. That seals off the pond from the gate. And this contractor, he had an innovative approach to this. He's going to pull the gate completely out of this bay. He's going to load it up onto a flatbed truck and take it to his shop in Midland. And he proposed that because he feels there's a significant amount of efficiency to be gained by doing everything in the shop. We think it's a great idea. It actually is an improvement in quality control. So in his shop, he's going to abrasive blast all the corroded metal and the failing coating system and everything. And it would be followed by priming and steel repairs, priming and painting. But before the improvements take place, after the abrasive blasting, we're going to assess the condition of the different components, the braces and the arms and all the other items of the dam. And that is something that unfortunately the very nature of the project lends itself to being done in the shop. We can't really assess these things, these components in place. You can see the condition and the failing paint, and it's really not able to be structurally assessed until the paint is all removed. So that's a component of the project that takes place in their shop. Some other scope items, we do know that the small bracing systems will need to be replaced. These are some of the smaller components where there's enough corrosion, leaving not quite enough metal to blast it and recoat it. The state has identified some of these items as needed to be replaced. And the last item is the replacement of the side and bottom seals, clearly evidenced by the buildup of ice over the past couple years. I mentioned the need to assess some of the components after it's out in their shop, after it's been abrasive blasted. We do anticipate, based upon our experience, that there will be some items, even though we could not specifically identify them at this juncture. We do envision some needed work, and we requested for these alternate bid items, anticipating that we'll want pricing for these. So we obtained competitive pricing for these items ahead of time. And some of these items that we asked for was replacement of the trunnion pins, replacement of some of the major supports like the large gate arms, and then there was an allowance for unspecified items too, things that we just, smaller in nature but can't really quantify just yet. So the low bidder on this project, we did this last month. The low bidder was Drace Construction out of Midland, and I think that we're very comfortable with the work that Drace has performed. This picture here is Getty's Gate number 4, which was replaced in 2016 under emergency circumstances when the hoist failed and damaged the gate. In any event, this picture here is Drace's finished work, and this is Gate 4. You can see a significant improvement in the conditions of the gates when complete. A summary of the schedule, where we're at. The proposed schedule right now has us on the council agenda in 2 weeks at the May 6th meeting. And if it was approved at that point, I would guess that a notice to proceed once we work through insurance bonds and sign contracts would be maybe as early as the start of June. That would set up a project completion. I had to be a little flexible in this, maybe as early as March or April, but I think as late as June, depending on what we find out in their shop and what additional work. And that's it.
Questions? Please.
Thank you. My question is, why was the decision made to repair? It looks like it's really rusted and damaged, and to do all this, how long is the life of it by doing this bead blasting and putting this on versus just getting a new gate like you did in the previous example?
The new gate was significantly more costly. And I do think, I would say that the failed coatings and the subsequent rust makes it look maybe a little bit worse than what it actually is. Once it's abrasive blast, it looks completely different, and it allows us to assess the remaining thickness of the steel, because surface rust is not something of a big concern, but left unimproved and the corrosion to continue and eat away loss of thickness, that's when you start to get into problems with replacement. So there is an expectation that we haven't lost a lot of material yet, and these gates are very easily restorable. And you know, if addressed properly in this project, I would expect we don't touch this for 15 years again, with maybe with some small touch-ups.
Similar question, that emergency repair, that was a new gate or?
That one was a new gate because it was damaged beyond repair. It was actually twisted to the point where, I mean, you can't really bend it back. So
Okay.
it's
That's fine.
sure.
So the related question is, if they do take one of these gates and after they clean it up, they decide it's better to replace it, is there wiggle room in this contract for that?
I guess I'll start out by first saying that nobody really expects that to be the case. The gate 4 was replaced only because of the severe damage to it. It was not replaced due to the corrosion or the condition of it. There are components of this that we do believe will be replaced, and we've built that into the bid. But there's certainly a large majority of the gate that does not need to be replaced, and we're going to be working with that to save cost.
Other questions? Bob?
So when you repair something like this, do you have to have the parts made, or can you order these things? I'm
It's
just
all-
thinking about the lead time on all of this.
It's all custom fabricated, but
Okay.
it's out of standard steel shapes like tubes and
Okay.
angles, and the availability is quick.
Okay,
And these fabricators, Gerace in this case, I mean, it's what they do every
do
single
it all the
day.
time, yeah.
And to fabricate, to fit exactly in place is no trouble at all.
but they,
Amazon.
pardon me?
Just Amazon.
Yeah, right. Exactly. They probably have them. Why not? So you're going to be blocking the river off using their log?
So,
For how long?
It is the city's stop logs.
Yeah.
It's something that we have for emergency
Okay.
conditions. They're stored at Barton, they'll be hauled over
Yeah.
to Getty's. We put them in one bay at a time. So
Okay.
there will be 3 bays active
Okay.
and 1 out of service at a time.
Thank you.
Fix a door, fix
Yeah.
another, fix another.
I have a question.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it sounds like the impact to the Gallup Pond will be none. There'll still be
There
river
should be no-
recreation,
there
pond
should be no
pedals, all that
impact. Yeah.
during the time.
Right.
And just very quickly, following up on the failure of the other gate, I presume that wasn't metal fatigue, it was something else?
No, that was an electronic condition. There's some electrical components that failed, and it
Okay.
was the dead of winter, so there's a ice component to it too, and
So nothing that we need to be concerned about with this
No.
project? Okay.
And the expense of this falls to parks because this is considered a recreational dam versus the power generating dams that?
Yeah, that's
okay.
exactly correct. So the Geddes Dam and the Argo Dam are both
Superior.
recreational dams. And there's revenue that we actually recognize in parks because of them.
And so Barton and Superior are
Are not parks,
not?
right?
Yeah.
Argo and Geddes only.
Okay.
And these were expected repairs that we've been talking
Right.
about, for kind of a couple of years at PAC, understanding that they would be coming, so.
Barton and Superior, they're gonna tag on to or those are coming too.
those are coming.
Their
too.
repairs coming to that.
In a few years, yes.
Yeah.
Further questions, motions?
I move
Bob?
approval.
So there's a
Second.
resolution to recommend awarding a contract in your packet. So there's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Further questions, discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate the time.
So we're gonna move right into item H2, which is discussion regarding the city center task force. Colin?
I suppose I can give a little bit of the background, but I would be looking at Councilmember Hayner and Grand. At the last city council, or at the April 1st city council meeting, there was the Center of the City Task Force was created, and as a part of that resolution, it asks the Park Advisory Commission to consider giving feedback on questions that could be asked in the application of people to be on the task force appointed by the two city council PAC members.
How many?
Nominated.
Not, I mean,
So I'm not-
We don't have that much power.
The question to us is what to ask potential.
Yeah, do you want me just to walk you through just a
Task- yeah, sure.
little quick history? We had a couple times, there was a resolution that came forward in a couple different iterations to council to establish a Center of the City Task Force. I had some concerns about how, well, both Jeff and I were there in both iterations of that we would be the two, as PAC representatives, the ones that would bring forth the nominees to council. The way that it was initially written was asking us to bring a slate. I was not comfortable with that because I don't want to drag individuals' names and have them fought between council members at the table. So this really came out of some work that I did with 3 other council members nominating the new police commission, the ICPOC, and we had a more enhanced application for that group that I thought helped us as council members make decisions about who we wanted to nominate. So the HRC, the Human Rights Commission, actually wrote the application. I'm not asking you all to do that, but I think both Jeff and I agree that having at least some additional questions, some supplemental questions to the standard application would be helpful in terms of getting us to a strong group of 9 that's in line with.
And we also
what this is
have,
looking
if
for.
I could, we also, it's gonna be difficult, because I've already had, and you may have had too, I've already had like 7 people approach me and say, hey, I'm interested in this, and there's a generic application that's available online for any board or commission. And we weren't sure if the best way would be to say, okay, everybody just turn it on, start filling out the generic application, and then we re-interview everyone with additional questions that PAC might form, or others might, want to be part of that process. Or we just have them customize the application like was done for police oversight. And, apparently it's relatively trivial for IT to customize that application for us before they turn on the application publicly. So we're willing to entertain any ideas that PAC might have of what you might be looking for in someone. Of course, the resolution that creates the task force somewhat describes
So can you
the
just
types of
describe-
folks we're looking for.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I think it's, if we're gonna propose questions for members of a committee, I think the most important, if not the only thing we need to know, is what's the charge of the committee? Like, what are the marching orders here?
Sure, and that is in your packet, I believe is.
Yeah, it's
as
the,
well.
this is quite a bit of resolution.
It's lengthy.
The last,
two.
the last paragraph of the first.
Yeah, it's like the
How deep
sixth
is it?
resolve clause says that, there's how the administrator provides, support.
But
And it kind of describes the things that they're being asked to recommend.
it's the bottom of the first page resolved, and the top of the second describes who.
So
What is the center of the city? How about we start there?
The center of the city is the working name of the former library lot.
Well, but here's the
Sort of.
thing that I find interesting about the language, that it actually, and where I think Pat comes in, is that the way that, for better or worse, it was written into Proposal A was that it doesn't just actually include the library lot, but includes some surrounding properties as well, including Liberty Plaza.
Yeah, so it was curious, so it's all city-owned properties that are bounded in the block that's William Liberty Division and Fifth. And so it's sort of a holistic approach to looking at the whole block is what this task force is up for.
All right,
And
so
so,
it's a downtown park and potential park.
yeah,
task
or
force.
commons, as it's being referred to.
Whatever it
but-
is.
At this point, though, there's a chunk of it that's under the purview of parks, like Liberty Plaza, and there's a chunk that is
And the Kemp House.
municipally owned, but not under the purview of
Right,
parks.
CDA.
Is that right?
That's correct, and the
Yes.
Kemp House also is on that block, which is a city property. I don't see moving anywhere, but just to throw that out there. So it's a very dynamic space. It includes the library, Library Lane.
And you want this group to say, you should ask potential candidates.
I'm not sure. We just wanted to
Yes,
bring it before
I would
PAC.
like to, I would like to
So-
hear that from this group. So a couple of questions that I've, been tossing around, I would like to maybe, but I want to get feedback from this group. I'd like to include a question about, which was very helpful with ICPOC, about challenges and opportunities, was one that I was thinking about, because I think that gives applicants the ability, it helped me with ICPOC. Do they really understand the community conversation? Do they understand what some of the real challenges are? And then allows them, without going into this, deep visioning perspective, but not to go that far, but just sort of, what do they think this property, what do they think the positive attributes are for the community with this property? So, so that I thought was a relatively simple question. I know there's some language in the resolution about skills and perspectives that we're supposed to be looking for. So I don't think our general application does a great job with that. So I was hoping to add a question about, since that is something that Jeff and I are tasked with,
Yeah,
that finding balance with these specific
Specifically to
skills
that,
and
because when they talk
perspectives,
about,
it's in the
immediate residential and business neighbors, well, that's fine and easily defined. Other downtown business and residential neighbors and commuters, well, that's a little more flexible. That could be anybody that has an interest in the downtown, or supporters of the concept of a center of the city, which was sort of discussed over at council.
Wait, where do you,
I'm reading from the resolve clause. These are the types of folks we're looking for, according to this resolution. Planners, landscape architects, architects or engineers with experience in designing public open spaces. Citizens throughout the wider community who will participate in the events and uses of the public space and of the site, and members of historically underrepresented groups in the planning process, such as youth, minorities, and people with disabilities. And I'm a big fan of involving youth in our planning decision, because it's gonna be their city in the future, and so I appreciate that part being in there. But the idea is, if there's anything that folks on PAC would like to add or say, we're interested in this type of thing or that type of thing, or could you answer this question or that, it would just help Julie and I to make these decisions.
I would suggest that you ask a residency question.
Yes.
I think that's on
I would ask.
It says
if
which
you-
ward do you live
if
in?
you,
Yes.
We'll see what's on the app already or not,
Right,
but
well, I
this is
don't think,
great. Yeah, this is good.
I would ask residency, I would ask someone who's familiar with financial I would want someone who's familiar with financial planning, kind of budgets and that kind of stuff. Those are two ideas.
Well, you have a general interest and experience category on here, but I guess you could ask in a more pointed way, what is driving your interest in this particular committee? If that, because that might just be helpful, informative.
I would definitely support that.
Yeah, when they talk about supporters of the center of the city concept, that's, why?
And I would suggest that you also get someone with some familiarity with low-income housing. I think it's important that those people with a sense of what to do with the property and how it might be used to address some of that stuff still under the proposal should be, you'd want someone like that on the task force.
And because the parcel, or the one parcel that is the primary focus of this development, although as Councilwoman Graham pointed out, it does, the way that Prop A was written, which put this on our plate here, is the whole block. But when you think of the library lot, and of course, there was all the infrastructure put in place. We were talking at Energy Commission the other night about, we're disappointed that it's extraordinarily expensive to add electric car charging to our parking structures because the transformers weren't in place. And they're all being used by the structure. It wasn't planned for that, many years ago. And making those electrical improvements to existing structures is very expensive. And here we have a structure that's sitting there that it was planned for a 16-story building essentially. And so there's all kinds of room for electric car charging
And this
on
also
this site.
includes the Y lot too, correct?
It does not.
No, it does not.
That's a different block?
Yeah, it's bounded by Fifth.
Oh, that's
But it does
nice.
include the library, it includes the credit union and these other businesses. So it's possible that from these 9 will be, or at least participating in this process actively will be, if not on the task force, will be folks from all these different properties, business interests, whatever. So it's gonna be a very dynamic conversation we're having, with lots of people expressing their needs and concerns, I imagine. So it's gonna be a challenge for the 9 folks who are on there.
Who will make, sorry to interrupt, Colin.
No,
Who will
thank
make
you.
the decision? Is it like all of city council together will vote on all of the applications, or what's the
That is-
process?
That is the hope.
Yeah, just
My-
like every other
my-
one.
Yeah,
My
Presuming
hope
that
is-
you'll be flooded with
Yeah, so just to, and I don't mean to just, keep harkening back to this, but with ICPOC, we had 63 applicants and we had 11 spots. So I anticipate we're probably
It'll be
numbers-wise gonna be in a similar situation, and that's where having, having a few extra questions that can really help tease out and bring balance to a group like this, because we really, that we're trying to bring so many different perspectives and then think about how people would work together as well, so, and just having some questions beyond kind of the basic, I think gave me some insight into how people think, how they work with others, how they address uncomfortable conversations and difficult work. So I don't know if any of you have ideas that could maybe get to that, but that's really helpful.
So here's the thing that surprised me with the police commission, is I don't think it asked for, well, maybe it did ask for a resume.
Yeah,
Or
the
maybe
generic
I just
application
offered to
attaches a
respond.
resume.
But you want to see, I mean, you really want to see someone's background and experience
You can ask
pretty
for that.
deeply, right?
Well,
It's
it-
tough
I
for
mean,
you.
there are some people who don't
except
make
that,
resumes.
I mean,
Their
for
lives-
those of us who work in kind of regular careers, we have resumes, we update them. If you're somebody who's a stay-at-home parent or, a resume may not be if you're looking for diversity of
Yeah.
experiences, I don't know, I mean, I think it could be useful to ask, do you have relevant expertise that you think would be helpful to this? And I think it would be good to get an idea if people are open-minded, because obviously there's gonna be a lot of need for compromise on this.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I can tell you from ICPOC, that if someone didn't answer, there were some questions about, about identity. And if someone wasn't willing to grapple with that question on an application, you were not gonna be willing to do the work of this committee. So those are the kinds of, insight that I'm hoping that we can get by asking just a few questions. I don't wanna.
So I
flood
think things
applicants.
that would be important for you developing this space or thinking about how this would be used is who are the users? So families, people with children, I think we can ask if they have children. I think that's allowed, just because, and ages, who will be using this and how will it be used? And if they have any experience with being a steward at a current NAP park, or being part of any city park activity already.
I hear, go ahead, Paige.
I was just gonna say, I think, Pravina, what you brought up goes to Julie's question of what do you see as opportunities and challenges for the space? Because hopefully it is someone who's thinking about the different users, and that would lead them to think about the different opportunities.
And maybe it's almost this essay of, what would you envision the space to be? Because I know there has been a lot of ideas and thoughts on this for a long time, but people, now that this is our direction, what would they use the space for from their perspective and their need base?
So Ruth, I hear you on the resume question. I mean, at some point, there's a limit to that, right? I don't think you want to draft people without knowing what their background and experience and strength is. Now, you can ask a bunch of questions to get to that, but I wouldn't forego it because we're afraid to ask someone who doesn't currently keep a resume to sketch out like work history on a page.
Would that block people who may be interested in saying, I'm a stay-at-home mom and now I can't apply for this because
You don't need a,
inclusion.
well, so you need to ask the question, you need to ask the questions. I also don't think it's that much of a burden to put down your work experience on a piece of
That's
paper.
because you're a good writer.
Huh?
That's probably because you're a good
Well,
writer.
no, I don't think I'm a good writer. I mean, that's, I got a cramp.
But
That's besides the
I
point.
wasn't saying not to get a sense of
Yeah.
people's interest and experience.
So ask the questions on the application.
Yeah, I think the
One or
skills,
the
I
other,
think
or
the
say
skills,
assertive
relevant
if you
experience.
can.
But
Bob?
we do want to think about diversity, because that's one of our charges.
Well, I'm trying to figure out how much you really want to think about diversity, okay? Because what I see in this and in so many things are, you have to be a writer and a reader. I mean, how are we reaching out to people who we never see in Ann Arbor? That's my question. I just want to throw that out there.
That we can discuss
And,
too,
and,
but-
and I just,
yeah.
please let me finish, all right? And I don't think this application, whether it's online, hard copy, is gonna do that. Now, maybe there's some other ways to do that with the committee, to reach out to people, but I have found this to be the case all the time. We seem to go to people that can do things like us first. And I'm guilty, I'm sitting here on this committee.
Yeah, and perhaps the resumes phase two. I
I mean, that just started me, the resume. There's more than that.
I'm afraid that from an inclusive perspective, it might feel like, oh, I need a PhD or a master's
You don't.
or a degree to even apply.
But you need to tell people, you need to communicate, then ask questions. You need to communicate what capabilities you bring to this group. Otherwise, there's no point, you might as well just pick at random.
So the generic application has a place to attach your resume or copy and paste your resume, and it's possible that and this would be for all boards and commissions, that we need to rethink that application and say, if it's appropriate, attach your, you know what I mean? Just
Yeah.
change the language of the application, but somehow we need to know what people have been up to.
We can soften that, I think,
Yeah,
just like you said.
yeah, that's what I'm saying, soften the language and asking for it, so people don't feel,
No, but
that
we-
they're not welcome if they don't have one. I mean, I didn't have one for years until I had to apply for board or commission. I had to put one together, because I had, owning my own business, it's been like that forever, and so I'm
I mean,
digging
one
out
of
my
the
old
things we did
resume.
is we reached out to a lot of different groups in the community in ways that we hadn't done before. And I think as a result, we got a lot of applicants in that last process that we wouldn't have done otherwise. So the other feedback I'm hoping to get, and I'm not trying to close off the conversation about questions, but is, are there groups that you think we should be reaching out to? Are there groups that you can reach out to encourage people to apply? At HRC, we had the interim for HRC compiled an entire list of local organizations. They also offered interviews for people who couldn't fill out the application, so that they were willing to read the application in person and then record the responses. No one actually took them up on it, but it was, it was available, but we ended up, I have to say, we ended up with applicants from groups that we haven't really seen large numbers from before as a result of that outreach, so we may not have quite as much time, but I'm hoping that we can,
Look, I think if we're
reach out
looking
to some
for,
groups.
if we're looking for diversity, we wouldn't have a limitation to an interest in only people who supported the project, right? We want supporters of the concept. That's
Is
big
the
diversity to me.
There was-
idea to have the applications and then from the applications interview like a certain amount of people?
So we to create a, Councilwoman Grant and I have been charged with this project.
Right.
And I think we're gonna create some kind of simple, I mean, we talked a little bit about this, some sort of simple scoring or matrix just to sort of start weeding through the applications and depending on how many we get. And, you know, do you have professional credentials? You might fit this one. There's 9 positions, so you might be a professional architect, so you're in this kind of pile. And kind of creating this sort of piles of folks or lists of folks and sorting through it. This will be the first for me for choosing people for this to bring forward, so, you know, I'm just keeping an open mind about it, and the idea that we would ask somebody a question and say, well, what's your vision for it? And I think that's legit, but I also wouldn't, you know, can't put a ton of weight on what a single person's vision is, but the idea that they have one, thank you, that's why you're applying, right? And maybe we see that, hey, that's very creative, and so I'm not sure what our scoring matrix is gonna be, and I know that for Police Task Force, there was concerns about the scoring process and what matrix did you use and all that, and so I just want to make sure that our consideration of the applicants is as transparent as one can be when it's just 2 people going over them. And so we want as much input as we can get from every place, including back, so.
And I think one of the reasons why we stayed away from points the last time is that I think the points do tend to lead towards a certain kind of bias.
Yes.
Because, you know, I really tried to be aware of being drawn to certain shiny objects like educational credentials, et cetera, and think about how we can, it just can't be the highest number of points. That's maybe a cutoff, but then from there, how do you pick a group that's really going to work together and dig into this work and be effective together? And just going in eyes wide open, knowing that that a lot of people are going to be really angry with you, and there's a freedom, I think, that comes with that, if one can accept.
Yeah, I think my use of the words points was
Jeff, take it back,
inappropriate,
please.
yeah.
Are there any other suggestions
Yes,
for
please.
questions on this application? Colin?
I guess the one thing that I would suggest, we included in the packet the report that the Park Advisory Commission actually put together now kind of a number of years back on downtown parks. And I agree entirely with Pravina that the charge is now to have a public space, to have a commons, whatever it happens to be called. I think that there's a lot of items in that report that can help influence the success of this project. So perhaps looking to it to phrase some questions, understanding perhaps what constraints the site may have, and ask people questions really actually based on that, and seeing what sort of solutions they might have for things like, how do you activate this space successfully?
That's right.
Things like that.
You might look at people there's a couple of citizens left, the one's not a councilman, who actually participated in that. So having somebody who's done the groundwork to begin with, mind you, what was dated under a new mandate, might help. Anything further? All right, we're gonna move on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We're gonna go to G2, resolution recommending approval of the fiscal year 2021 fee adjustments for Parks and Recs. Colin?
Sure, we can talk about the fees first, or if you prefer, I can do the presentation.
What else? Whatever you want.
Why don't I do the presentation, and then we can actually do the fees and the overall budget
All right.
after that. So I'll swing out there for a second. Do I have to state my name?
Welcome, sir. 3 minutes.
That will push it. I will try to move quickly.
I'm joking.
But, let's see.
Not bad. It's 5 to 5. We'll get our people out of here by 5:30.
It's so hot.
F5, buddy. Oh, there you go. No.
There we go. Okay, so I'm here to talk about the proposed 2020-2021 operating budget for parks. And to start with, just a little bit of a review of the process. Staff work on the plan over the winter, and then over the last month, I've had the opportunity to speak to Commissioner Gallardi and to Commissioner Morrison for their feedback on the budget. And today is the day that the Park Advisory Commission takes action, and then City Council will receive your resolution for consideration at their May meetings. And according to City Charter, City Council is required to adopt the budget at the second meeting in May. So just a little bit of background too about how important the budget is to staff and kind of the work that we put into it. Staff and parks are responsible for having to track expenditures and revenues and having to adjust accordingly as the year goes on. It's an agenda item when staff meet with their supervisor. That is just a standing item and spoken about monthly. And it's also something that I report to the city administrator on quarterly. I thought I would take just a moment to highlight how we ended the 2018 season. You can see for the expenditure budget that year was $6.279 million for Parks and Recreation, and we came in at $6.278 million. That's a little too close to comfort for me, to be honest. I'd like a little bit more wiggle room than that, but I hope that it does reflect kind of how seriously staff take their operating budgets, how they manage it, understanding that there's a lot of variation which can happen because of weather. We have kind of a warm weekend, you're gonna have more staff. If you have kind of a cold, rainy weekend, staff are going home. So like having to manage all of that takes time, and there is quite a lot of effort which is put into it by staff. So I'll spend a minute just to review the two primary ways parks are funded. So the first is the general fund, and that supports mowing, snow removal, core services, the operation of the recreation facilities. And in 2020, there's a 1.41% cut across the general fund. All city departments are asked to submit a budget proposal that achieves the cut or comes close. And for parks, that's roughly a $125,000 reduction. We can achieve that through a combination of expenditure reduction and revenue increase. And we'll kind of start to get into what that kind of looks like in a minute, but in FY 2021, there's no cut. So 2020, there's 1.41%, FY 21, there's nothing. The other major funding source is the millage for parks, and this is what was renewed in November of 18. There is no cut in the millage. There's no cut in 20, there's no cut in 21, there's no reduction. As a matter of fact, there's a little bit of an increase in the revenue that the millage is going to bring in, which will allow for greater expenditures. So I think that's just important to note and good news. To head back to the general fund, as I explained, the 1.41% cut, that's actually based off of the estimated 2020 operating budget, which is almost $8.8 million, so that's how you get the $125,000. The proposal that staff have put together identifies a cut of $85,000, again, through a combination of increases in revenue and the decreases in expenditures. The vast majority of it comes through revenue generation. So as a matter of fact, in the general fund, we actually see a proposed increase for kind of a handful of items, all of which have actually come to PAC over the last kind of year. There's the increase in the contract for Community Action Network for the Bryant Community Center. We're proposing to include the outdoor ice rink in the 2020 budget because it's ended up there the last 3 years, even if it actually didn't start there. We're also suggesting that the expenditure budget increase for the Argo parking lot contract and also the increase in cost for the fleet items at the golf courses that were spoken about actually just a couple months ago at PAC. There are also expenditure reductions, and this is kind of good news. We've got about $77,000 that we were able to identify, and this is primarily a result of the park operations and the Parks and Recreation Services coming together. This is the first time that we made a combined budget, so we were able to review all of our equipment, all of our fleet, all of our IT, and adjust accordingly. So we went through, there were some IT items we didn't need, you know, there were programs that weren't being used, those types of things. There was also equipment that had a home account in the general fund where really the type of work it was doing, the correct home account would have been the millage. So after we cleaned all of that up, it results in a $77,000 general fund savings. If you have a look at all the expenditures in totality, the increases and the decreases results in a little bit under $6,000 for expense savings. Where we were able to achieve the majority of our target was actually through revenue. We were able to adjust a little bit of revenue to reflect historical amounts actually recognized, and the other way was to propose increases in fees, primarily for day camps and for ice rink rental. Those two things alone come close to generating $60 million, or that'd be good if it was $60 million, $60,000 for parks there. And I'll kind of highlight with the fee increases for these particular items. The last time that they were adjusted was in 2010. So it's been a long time since there's been a price increase in these. And we'll also have a look at kind of the comparative information to see how they stack up against like a camp for kind of the YMCA or for Rec and Ed. And all of those numbers suggest that the proposed increase is really in line. So after you combine the revenue and the expenses from the page before, you come up with the $84,000, or what is roughly about a % reduction for the general fund. Here in the chart with lots of numbers, basically is just a high-level overview of all the general fund items. You can see that the revenue stays right around 4.8. The overall expenses for Parks and Rec stay at about 8.8. There's a little bit of a decrease in park operations. That's because of the reallocations of equipment and IT that we just talked about. And there's a little bit of an increase in Parks and Rec. That's because of the ice rinks in part, and also the contract for Bryant Community Center, seeing increases in those. Moving from the general fund into the millage fund, I'm excited to share that we're proposing to add a park planner, which is a professional position requiring a master's degree. The entire cost is $122,000. That includes the salary, the benefits, the health care, and all of the IT costs to actually get a staff person up and running. One thing I would like to highlight is that prior to the recession in 2008, we always had at least actually 2 planners, if not 3 planners in parks. Mm-hmm. So while we are asking for another position here, it's actually a return to a prior service level. I think we also really could use an additional planner. There is more money available for capital projects. You'll see I just kind of pulled a couple numbers here. FY 2015, $881,000 was available for capital projects. This year, in the proposed budget, we have $1.5 million. So more projects really requires an additional planner too. Lastly, I think it's kind of important to highlight, if we do get another planner, we have an opportunity to get more grants. We've been successful with grants over the years. A lot of times those grants can be for pretty significant sums of money, $300,000, $447,000, all sorts of things like that. However, they are a lot of work. It takes a long time for a staff person to apply for a grant and then to administer it and close it out. But if we were able to get 2 park planners, I would feel comfortable really committing to having each planner apply for 1 significant grant each year. And I think that that would actually be a case where we might actually be able to recoup the cost of the position. The other item to highlight in the millage is adjusting the operating budget for park operations up and for park forestry down. The only reason for doing this is this reflects the actual expenditures over the last 5 years. So another slide here for the millage, just the high-level overview. You can see the revenue goes from about 6.3 in 2019 up to close to 6.7 in these first 2 years. So that provides the funding for another park planner. Overall expenses also grow accordingly. And then you can see that the park operations budget is proposed to go from roughly 2.5 to 2.9. And correspondingly, the forestry going from 900,000 down to 600,000. Again, the only reason for doing this is just to accurately reflect the experience that we've had over the last 5 years with these funds. If for some reason in the course of the year we realize we have more needs than we expected in forestry, we have the latitude to overspend in forestry if we underspend in operations or capital or NAP. So it's a little bit of a balancing act. But I think it's just important to share that we're not completely locked in there. You can see for capital, the increase goes from 1.9 to 2.1. That's really primarily the cost of the new planner position. And then for natural area preservation, stays pretty steady. In the middle year, there's a little bit of a spike as they would like to purchase inventory management software for keeping track of everything in the natural areas from animals, fauna, etc. What they are currently using is very outdated. I'd also like just to spend a moment considering what we hope to achieve with our operating budgets. What you see here are the goals and performance measures that I review actually with the city administrator also on a quarterly basis. I won't go through all the performance measures, but I'd like to highlight a couple just to show how they work. On the top left under core service, you'll see that we highlight something to provide high quality programs. So that's obviously good that we want to do that, but how are we holding ourselves accountable to that? So in order to see that we are achieving that goal, what we started to do is track the percentage capacity of the day camp spaces filled, and also aim to have 90% of the participants score the program 4 out of 5 or higher. We also have core service is to engage volunteers. We want to see how many hours a year are volunteered, relate that back to like a full-time staff equivalent. And we also want to make sure the volunteers have a great experience. So these are some of the things that we're doing to make sure that the money is entrusted to us. We are trying to spend as wisely as we are able. So to conclude, the highlights really of the proposed budget includes the fee increases, increase in the community center funding, adding the outdoor ice rinks, no reduction in the general fund service delivery is really a key message for those of us who have been on this commission for multiple years. There were certainly years in the past when we could not say that, so we're excited to be able to say that again. We also, of course, have the addition of the planner, which we believe will increase capacity for projects, partnerships, and grants, and continue to have an emphasis on quality programs and customer service. And that's it.
Questions?
I need my water, so I'm coming back around.
Got it. Sounds like it. It's a big water. Anyone? Really?
I mean, I get an opportunity to ask mine at another point, so I don't know that I need to ask here.
Fair enough.
That'd be fun. I'd be happy to hear.
I mean, just a couple of things I just was curious about. So with the forestry costs historically kind of trending down for parks, I don't have it with me, but council approved some sort of trimming contract with somebody for parks maintenance, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that was in the last month, and
Yeah.
the contract amount was $450,000 for a year. And that actually ties exactly into the amount which we have in the budget for forestry for those couple of years.
But that's, Parks was paying for that, right?
Yes.
Okay, that's
Yep.
what I thought.
Yep.
And so have some of that reduced cost come because we've outsourced that away from forestry, or is, how is it that it's just the way it was trending down because we're getting caught up, or?
So what we had in terms of expenses prior to this reorganization is I had to look at the forestry expenses for 6 years. And that was when the work was being performed by city staff with city equipment. And the amount ranged between about $300,000 and $600,000 a year. So now that we'll be contracting out the majority of it, I would imagine that a number in that same frame would make sense to start with as a departure point. We still have the ability to use city forestry when and if needed, and then they would charge their time to us as a part of that budget.
Okay.
Yep.
Other questions? Motions?
Well, before I make a motion, I just want to congratulate Colin and his team. I've been in this role, working on the budget for now, I think 3, maybe 4 years. And every year, I feel as if we're, we have to be responsible with the community's money. And I think that that Colin and his team have put together solid budgets, but more importantly, have managed them appropriately during the course of the years after they've been approved. So with that, I'll offer a motion to approve.
I have a comment before your
Oh, okay.
motion, sorry. Well, first of all, 2 thumbs up on the idea of adding a parks planner. And I think the Parks Department has been super successful with grants. Sometimes it's taken a couple rounds, but I think that's a really good thing. Just one comment on the presentation. The first time I looked at this, I was like, whoa, these percent increases, they're really high. And it wasn't until you said, well, these are not the ones that we increased last year, which is what I was thinking, but they haven't been increased since 2011, 2005. I think maybe you want to lead with that or put that
Okay.
at kind of at the top where it's a little more visible that this is, we're not expecting to increase 15% every year.
Yep, good point. Thank you.
Was there something else? Is there a second?
Second.
Further
I'll
discussion?
second that. I mean, sorry.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Thank you. That's it.
So we
right?
still
We'll have
actually-
public comment. What do we miss?
No.
So there's actually 2 resolutions. There's the one for the budget, and
Oh.
then there's another
fee
one for the
increase, the
fees.
fees.
All right, so we just did the
Yeah.
budget, now
Yep.
let's do the fees.
Yeah. Yeah, so the fees, I mean, I can kind of reiterate what I said, but essentially what we have as the supporting stuff today in the packet, if you had an opportunity to look over it, there's kind of 2 main things. One is there's kind of a comparative fee data, and that'll be where we take the existing cost for the day camps, and we figure out, okay, that's this much an hour, and then we compare it to like things within the community. We used, I think, Rec and Ed, Leslie Science Nature Center, the YMCA. And at the end of that, we look to see how do the rates compare. And I think they're very much in line, still a little bit on the lower end compared to those, to be honest. We did the same thing for the ice rink rentals. We really had to look around more southeast kind of Michigan because there's an awful lot of ice rinks out there. And again, after the increases, we're still very much, I think, in kind of the middle range of those. I think it's very reasonable fees for it. We did have an opportunity also for the ice rental groups. We have a number who have been skating for a long time with the city. They skate, say, every Saturday morning from 9 to 10, there's a group that rents the ice. If we had that contact information for people, we let them already know about the increased rates. And so far, we've heard back from some, and kind of the majority of what we've heard back is, yep, we understand, or it's about time. Thanks for letting us know. So I'm not saying that's what everybody's reaction is going to be to it, but we have reached out, and the initial feedback has been pretty positive and understanding.
That market rate stuff is important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very important.
Colin, thanks for, I
Yeah.
just want to comment and say thanks for giving us this table. It's clearly, I mean, it just shows how reasonable the rates are and have been, and I don't think anyone will raise an eyebrow at it.
Question or point of clarification, the scholarships that are available for parks, they will cover the new fees, right?
Yep.
The increased fee.
Yep, so there's a scholarship program for Ann Arbor Parks and Recreation Services, and there is not a limit on the number of scholarships that we award. It is entirely based on need, and if like the fee increase is something which would affect a family like that, that would be covered.
Other questions or motions?
I'll motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? Motion carries. Who's in here today? Oh, item I, public commentary. Is there any member of the public who'd like to speak? Hearing none. Report from the Parks and Rec manager. Colin?
I won't talk much more today, because my voice is not doing well, but I do want to share a couple of things. We are in the middle of hiring. We've got at least a couple hundred seasonals added on already for the summer, so it's an exciting time. The canoe liveries are going to open April 20th. That's Saturday, or specifically, we open Argo March 4th. So Argo opens the 4th, and it's the weekends only, but we open on.
You mean May 4th?
Yes, May 4th.
May 4th,
Yeah,
okay.
yep.
October 4th would be a little late.
Yeah.
Star Wars Day.
Yes, it'll be a short season. And I also wanted to remind people, we have Earth Day at Leslie Science and Nature Center is on Sunday, April 28th, noon to 4, which is always a good event, and lots of nonprofits and sustainability action items. So if you can attend, hope to see you there. That's it.
Thank you. Questions for Colin? Ruth, do you have a report from the Rec Advisory Commission? Rec.
Just really quick, we had, at the last meeting, we had presentations on Young Fives and team sports and the challenges with changes in interest over time and dealing with people who want more competitive, less competitive. And the Freeman Environmental Education Center, which you know, the Freeman School, the district is turning into an environmental education center, and this summer programming's going to start. There's a lot of issues with the building, so they're not indoor programs at this point. But there's a committee of teachers and community members that have been working on programming and ideas, and I think that's something. I think it's out. Is it outside of the city boundaries? It's in Dixboro, but I think it's something that's going to really grow over time. And there are spots available for both people who live in the city of Ann Arbor and people who live in the school district to apply to be on RAC.
All right. Thank you. Questions for Ruth? Hearing none. There are no reports from commissions. There is no closed session. The transmittals are attached. We stand adjourned. Thanks, everybody. Thank you.